Right, I am going to go ahead and get started. If all of my fellow panelists can mute until your turn to go on camera and speak. Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Gleason. I'm the Director of Planning and Construction for the Chicago Park District. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are recording this meeting and we will post it on our website. Give us a few days to get it up there, but then anyone who wants to review it or if someone missed the meeting will have an opportunity to review the video. And with that, I will turn it over to Julia Perkins to walk us through the logistics of the meeting for this evening. Julia.
Thank you so much, Heather. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited that you've made time out of your schedule to be here. Just a couple of things. Your chat has been disabled. We are going to use the Q&A. So again, you won't be able to use the chat, but please put all of your comments and your questions in the Q&A. The presentation will be around 90 minutes. We may go over because we want to make sure that we get to everybody's comments and questions. So I will come back at the end of the presentation and then I'll start reading off those questions and comments. Again, thank you so much for making time for this important meeting, and I'll turn it back over to Heather.
I'm sorry. Can you hold for 1 second? I have a question.
Is there any sound? Yes, there is sound. I think that Susan, that we're working on that. Can you call in for audio? I believe that
it would have been in your invitation.
It would have been in your invitation. So if you go back to the invitation, Mr. Lowe, you can then go in to call. Okay, thank you so much. Now I'll turn it back over to Heather.
All right, terrific. Thank you. So if we go to the next slide, we want to go through our agenda for the evening. It's coming, I promise. There we go. So we kind of did our welcome already, but we wanted to do a couple of things this evening. So one is we wanted to provide a summary of our last meeting. We had a meeting back in May of 2024, and the design team has reviewed some of the issues that all of you brought up that the public raised at some of our last meetings. So we're going to walk through an analysis of some of those questions that you asked of us last time. We also want to provide a design update to the group so that you can hear and see where we are on the design process. We want to discuss cultural interpretation a little bit and the process for that. And then we want to explain next steps. And then we'll give you a chance to do our Q&A and get your feedback. Okay, next slide, that's fine. So just to give you a little bit of a summary of our last meeting, there were a couple of issues that community members raised, and we wanted to give a quick review of those and then have our design team in the first couple slides of the presentation address them. So one of the things that came up was concerns over the flyover connection. So again, this is sort of the bridge-like structure that's coming into the park from the lakefront trail, or the flyover as it's called. Some of you were concerned that the flyover connection was in the wrong location, given just how busy that area is, that the flyover is, and you also were concerned about how we would prevent bikes from riding into the park space. So some of you suggested maybe we can move the flyover more to the south part of the site near the bridge house. So we'll have the design team address that this evening. There were also some concerns raised about the wet prairie location. Several of you asked why we couldn't move the wet prairie location to the northeast corner of the site instead of the southeast corner where it's currently located. So we'll address that. There were a couple comments that we did not have enough trees on the site, so we will definitely do that. And then we also had some questions about canoe docking stations that we wanted to address, so we'll give you some feedback on that. And then lastly, we had questions about cultural interpretation and how we will interpret DuSable and his relationships on the site. So with that brief overview of some of the things that you shared with us last time, I'm going to turn it over to Ramona Westbrook from Brook Architecture and explain our analysis of these issues. Ramona.
Thank you, Heather. So on the next slide, you'll find that there is an aerial view of the site, also showing the flyover connection, actually the flyover and its relationship to the site plan. So what we're trying to illustrate on this plan are two things. One, we want you to see where there are intersections along the flyover where there's actually traffic coming into the flyover that makes it a bit more busy or a bit more congested. And then there also, the yellow dots are indicating locations where there is a stair transition, where again, there are additional people that are coming onto the actual flyover. On the next image, you'll see that we've taken some photographs of the actual flyover when you're walking on the flyover. I'm going to wait for that one to come. There must be a lag in our transition. Okay, so on this image, you can see on the left, we've taken two photos of the bridge location as you are walking on the flyover. And you'll see that you've got a very narrow view corridor, and the corridor in and of itself narrows down at the bridge location. You'll also see that the views are obstructed. You've got a structure that's over you, you've got structures on each side of you, and it's very dark. You'll also see that there's quite a bit of pedestrian traffic that merges in. So if I can just recall or remind you that on the flyover, you have not only people walking, but you also have bikes, you have people running, and you have other kinds of vehicles, kind of recreational vehicles that are on that flyover. So all of that is kind of merging at a point right at that bridge connection. And the other challenge with locating a connector to the park at this location is that that connector would actually provide structure over the entrance to the park, making the park a lot more dark and restricting the views that you would have as you enter into the park. So on the right in the blue, we're showing our images of where we've actually proposed to locate the connector to the flyover. And you see at that point that the views are much more open. There's a lot more light. You can see much further ahead of you. So it gives you a chance to slow down and anticipate traffic. The other reason why we wanted to locate it at this location or put it at this location is because there's already a merge point near here. And so traffic has already slowed down and people are already anticipating movement. Whereas on the other location, you're actually coming either right off of a hill or preparing to go up a hill where you actually start to see increase in movement of traffic. The other reason why we're comfortable with this location, not only the view corridors are much more wider and the fact that traffic has slowed, but we reviewed this location with CDOT, the Department of Transportation, and they feel like this is the safest location to have a connection into the flyover. So I hope that alleviates concerns. We still know that, anytime you're changing direction with traffic and you have a lot going on, there's still an opportunity for something to go wrong. But we think given that the options that are before us, this is the best location to have the flyover connection. You can go to the next slide. I think on this slide, we're also just illustrating how we are accommodating bikes. We are providing bike parking at 2 locations. One location is at the flyover connection, which I'd just like to remind you, the flyover connection is like the second floor to the park. It is above the park. So right after, when you pull off of the flyover, there's like a bike porch, and we're providing a location there where you can park your bike. And the intention is that that is the entrance into the park. The park is very different from the flyover in that the flyover is very active, it's very bright, it's moving. The park is a much more respite, quiet place. So the message that we're sending is that you are entering into a quiet place, get off your bike and walk down to the park. So that's the location at the flyover connection. Once you get into the park, and as I stated before, the park is actually on the first level. There is another location for you to park your bike. Now, the expectation at this ground level entrance is that if you are entering the site at the ground level, and Susan, I don't know if you can point to that area of the site, but if you are entering the park at the ground level, we have also located bike racks there where you can park your bike again, get off your bike and enter and come into the site. So those are the 2 locations for bike accommodations. Also, we're noting that at the flyover, and I'll go back to that, we're providing bollards so that large vehicles cannot come down onto the flyover connection. It limits the size of the vehicles that can come off the flyover onto the park. And I think that's it. So the next slide, I believe, will address the wet prairie location. And I think, Eric, you're speaking to that?
Actually, I think I'm leading it off, Ramona, and then Eric's going to finish us. Hi, I'm Carol Ross Barney, and I am the lead designer for this project. I'm working with an absolutely amazingly talented team. Anyway, one of the questions we had was, why did you put the wet prairie at the southeast corner? And I have to tell you that one of the most inspirational things, one of the reasons we did it, or we started there, is this was the location that was recommended in the 2006 framework plan, which you see here. And those of you who have been following this park for a long time know that a lot of thought was put into this framework plan. And that doesn't mean that was set in stone for us. We looked at it, and I have to tell you that after looking at the framework plan and the whole team reviewing history, ecology, location, we were really inspired by the environment that the Chicago River made, the place this was in the 18th century when DuSable lived here. And we wanted our design to recall that landscape that had a lazy prairie river that basically did not have a channelized or a distinct river mouth that had a wetlands. And we sort of thought it would be really wonderful if you could stand on this site and at least in some small way, see what DuSable saw, what people arriving in Chicago saw. And so after a lot of consideration, we decided that we'd like to keep it where the prairie, the wetlands, where the framework plan suggested. There were a few, so basically we want, when you come into the park, it's almost as if you were standing in DuSable's house. You'd see over a prairie wetlands and then to a magnificent lake. However, those were not the only reasons that we had to locate it here. There were several technical reasons, and my partner, Eric Martin, is going to elaborate on those for you.
Thanks, Carol. Pass to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as Carol indicated, I mean, there's a couple other reasons which drove the location of the wet prairie being on the southeast corner of the site. And one of those reasons is due to the existing structure that supports or that braces the sheet piling or the dock wall that goes around the perimeter of the site. And this dock wall was installed by the Park District several years back. And so what's supporting the dock wall are those lines, the dash lines that you see. Those are called tie rods that then goes back to a dead man. That's the double line further back. And so as you can see, the elevation of when they install these tie rods, they went in at different elevations. And so on the northeast corner of the site, you see it's a +3 elevation. Then at the southeast corner, it's a -5 feet from that grade. And so because of that higher elevation, that would just make it really impossible to install the the wet prairie area in that location just because of the height of those tie rods. And then in conjunction to that, we were looking in utilizing this wet prairie area as part of our stormwater management strategy, which will retain the water in that into that area. And so we needed that depth for retaining that water prior to being emptied out into the river. So that, again, is another reason why we located the wet prairie area in that southeast corner, because of that elevation change. So those are like really the technical reasons why it just kind of forced us to locate that wet prairie in the southeast corner of the site. And so hopefully that addresses the concerns about why we located that area, that feature in that area. Next slide. Heather will be talking about the new docking station.
All right, thanks, Eric. Another question that came up during some of our community meetings was whether or not we could add a canoe docking station. And so you can see on the slide here, the answer is essentially we can't include it at this time, but we might consider it in a future phase. And I wanted to explain a little bit in detail as why that is. So I think that very first image that you see at the top of the slide there kind of shows how the seawall undulates. It's not perfectly straight, even elevation there. And so a lot, as Eric just explained, that definitely ties into some of the issues in terms of where we can site things. But also the bottom pictures show you the real difference in grade. And obviously the river changes level over time. So these pictures were taken pretty recently, but there is a significant height difference between water level and the seawall. And the reason that the seawall is built that way, I know a few people said, well, why can't you lower the seawall so that we can actually get a canoe launch in? And one of the reasons is really because we had to do the seawall so many years ahead of when we knew the park was going to get developed and had the funding to be able to go forward. So the seawall was built as part of our environmental work. We had 2 different phases of environmental work that removed thorium from the site. And we did 2 different agreements with the Environmental Protection Agency in order to do that. So in order to do that, we had to imagine the site as it would be in the future, but also we had to deal with the time that we were putting it in. We had high lake levels. If those of you remember that the Great Lakes were dealing with really high lake levels a couple of years ago into 2020. And so when the seawall was completed, we really thought that if we lower it too much, we could end up causing flooding on the site. We didn't know how long that condition would continue. And so we decided that the most important thing so that we could develop the park would be that we protect the land that's there. And so we have an even seawall all the way around. It would be really, really expensive for us to break into that seawall. We'd probably have to go back to the EPA, do another agreement, and over time, it would take a very long time to do that. And we know that there have been people been waiting for this park for a really long time, 30 plus years, so we want to get going on it. The other thing just to mention really quickly is that because Related Midwest, as you've heard us talk about before, is a funder of the park, we did not know at the time we were building the seawall when that project would get started. So that was another factor that we had to take into consideration, was that we might not be able to have the full funding for the park for quite a while. So again, we wanted to make sure we protected the land. But I do want to say that, you know, at the park district, we never consider a park completely done. Even when we do new parks like this, we're always looking into the future. People come forward over time and ask for new uses on park, and we consider them. So it's not no forever, but it is something that we could potentially consider as a future phase. And one thing that we wanted to talk about in the future is whether or not actually putting it on the riverside is the right place to put it. There's a ton of boat traffic. As you know, we have a lot of tour boats, just a lot of going on. So one thing that we had kicked around if we were to look at this in the future was to look at putting it on the Ogden slip side, which might just make a nicer kayaking or canoe experience as you're putting into the water, not having to deal with all of that choppy water and busy traffic. So with that, I will turn it back over to Carol to talk about our sun study.
Thanks, Heather. Another question that we had was about the number of trees we were proposing, and particularly about the concern of environmental comfort in the summer. We've just gone through a brutal summer, and climate change is not promising that they'll be less brutal in the future. And we do want this to be an environment where you can sit in the shade, you know. A contemplative environment was what was asked for and thought about the most. So what we decided to do, though, before we added trees, because I just talked about the fact that we wanted to recall the feeling of being on a prairie, we decided that we'd actually study the actual conditions during the summer. And so what you're looking at now is sun studies. The date you're seeing right now is June 21st. So this is the sun, basically the sunniest, the highest the sun gets. And the thing that we found out that was really interesting is if you start in the upper left-hand corner, that's 8 a.m. And you can see, and we're showing the trees that are proposed, but you can see that the park is basically not shaded at that point. If you go to the very end of that upper row, that's 12 o'clock. on June 21st. So the sun is almost overhead, slightly to the north still. But what's really incredible and what's terribly interesting to us is that if you go to 2 o'clock, what sort of kicks in is I don't mean this really seriously, but I do. Our urban trees, the surrounding buildings, skyscrapers or skyline, actually create a great deal of shade. You can see it starting at 2 o'clock and going to 6 o'clock when the entire site is essentially in shade. And we're shaded by the monumental Chicago skyline. So what we've decided to do is strategically place trees so that we can create an environment that does recall DuSable's period of history, and also create some spaces that are not in shade during our shoulder seasons, and take advantage of the actual place that the site is in our city. And so as we go further, we'll show you where those trees will be. But this study helped us helped inform that strategy and our design direction. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to show you where we are in the design right now. And Ramon is going to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Carol. So really just kind of piggybacking on Carol's comment about creating a space and being able to see the expanse of what was here, recalling what was here when DuSable was here. The park is really designed to be a series of journeys and meeting places. And that when a visitor enters the park, the intent is that they're greeted with this expansive view of the lake, and then also an orienting kiosk and the option to take 3 paths around the park. The 3 paths are the timeline path, the mural walk, and then the boardwalk, all of which circulate you around the park. The main path will feature a timeline of DuSable's life, and I'll just kind of draw on that. The main path is this large one here. It will feature a timeline of DuSable's life, and it will circulate you around the park and around the 3 hills that are located on the park. There's also a pavilion that celebrates DuSable's success as an entrepreneur. And this pavilion will also offer the opportunity for a visitor to pause and reflect upon the views of the lake. The path will continue around the main hill and take the visitor past the mural wall, which will feature images of Chicago and DuSable's life as an explorer, an entrepreneur, and a family man. In addition to that path, we have a boardwalk that actually hugs the perimeter, that's B, that hugs the perimeter of the site. And it offers the visitor an intimate connection with the water. It'll feature gracious seating that orients you towards the lake. And as we've discussed earlier, the wet prairie, which is shown by, indicated by the letter D. And a garden with native plantings, some of which will recall some of the foliage that was around during DuSable's area. Not the same foliage, but at least recalls it. But this boardwalk will terminate in the woodland area, which is on the north end of the site, indicated by H, where a group of trees will offer a quiet place for respite on this peninsula. And the tallest hill, which is the hill that actually connects you to the flyover. Oh, thank you, Susan. The tallest hill, visitors can take a serpentine path or the steps up to this hill and walk onto the flyover at that location. So in summary, the park is intended to encourage the visitors to explore, to play and relax while learning about the life and the legacy of DuSable, and also learning about the flora and the fauna of Chicago during his era. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Carol, and she's going to take you through some more images that will show you in more detail what we have in store.
So we've made some drawings for you. Sort of someone push this forward. We've made some drawings for you that start to show how what the experience of visiting this park would be like. So you'll enter the park under Lakeshore Drive off the north side of the river. the Riverwalk there. And when you enter the park, this is the view that you'll see. So I hope that, you know, what you're seeing is what I described before, this vast lake, and then there'll be the wetland prairie right in front of you. And there'll be some shade trees, but they'll be off to the side so that you get a magnificent view of the lake. One of the first features that you'll see when you enter the park is a pavilion. It's shown to the left there, which will recall DuSable's occupation of Chicago. I have to, someone says, well, do you know this site isn't really where DuSable's estate was? Yes, we do. DuSable's, if there's anyone we're very well aware that DuSable actually owned the property that's immediately east and north of Michigan Avenue River intersection. But we still want to recall the type of environment that Chicago was. So you can go. Oh, by the way, here we'll introduce the park. You'll get some information about the interpretation and what you're going to see. Susan will talk about that in the cultural interpretation part of our presentation tonight. So can we go to the next slide? So I want to explain further how we plan to treat the edge, because we do think it's really important to get to the edge of the site and experience the lake. I mean, that is the most glorious feature of almost all of our lakefront parks, the ability to get right to the edge of this unbelievable body of water. So what we propose to create is a boardwalk. You can see here that we are providing seating, and we'll be providing some native planting. The boardwalk will cover 3 sides of the site, essentially, till you get to the north side and the woodlands area. So we can go to the next slide. I think we didn't show what you really would see here is a Coast Guard station in the locks. And this is a view of the wetland prairie from the boardwalk. We also have planned to provide a path through the prairie so that you can get more intimately acquainted with some of the plants and basically the flora and fauna of this site. And you will be able to enter that from the boardwalk, and you'll also be able to view the prairie from our what we've done here is we've made a pavilion, you can see it in this slide, that recalls DuSable's estate. And I'm purposely not saying DuSable's house. What we're proposing are a series of frames that show the size of the house that DuSable sold in about 1790. When DuSable left Chicago, he sold his property to an agent of John Kinsey, interestingly enough. He sold it for £6,000. And the worth of 6,000 colonial pounds would be about over $1.5 million today. So this was a sizable estate. It included his main house and barns and outbuildings. And so what you see, what we hope to do is to list some of those items in these screens, and the actual cutout, which you can kind of see here, you'll see it better in a later slide, is the size of the house. It was 20 feet by 40 feet. A lot of times people say, well, DuSable's cabin was here. DuSable did not have a cabin. He had an estate. So let's go to the next slide. So this is another view of our pavilion, and you can see how we're representing the house. Basically, the slab area is the basic dimension. And then we're working on the design of these frames, but we'd like to include a description of DuSable's possessions. One of the few documents we have that they still exist of DuSable's life is his bill of sale. And so we know quite a bit about what he left here in Chicago, down to the number of chickens he owned. And we want it to be interesting. We want it to be intriguing. We want it to give people an idea of what life was like then, what inspired Chicago to become a great trading city, and basically inspire people to look for more information and to fit themselves into the picture. So there's one more slide, I think, of our experience. A lot of people have been interested. You can go to the next slide. This is the last sort of experiential drawing we've made for this, but I wanted to show you the flyover connection. You will be able to walk essentially from the flyover, which is about 24, 25 feet above our site, to a lookout and look over the lake, look over the park. It'll also make a really, we have been really diligent about connecting this park to the city. So this is a really important connection. And you can see that we're creating basically a vista hill here. The other thing that's nice about this drawing is it shows, Ramona mentioned our mural wall. You can see it here. There'll be more drawings of it later in this presentation. Our artist will present it to you. I have to tell you though, I'm really proud of this wall because I always think that design does its best job when everything that you put in it does more than one function. And so really what we do here is we create a really effective edge to the park too, cutting it off from Lakeshore Drive and basically from the lower level of Lakeshore Drive. And so we create this very nice edge to the park here also. Also on the slide, you can see our serpentine path, which allows handicap access to that uppermost vista point. So we're really excited about this.
Carol, before you move to the next slide, I just want to point out that you'll note that, you know, the flyover connection, as I mentioned before, is like the second floor. The park is on the first floor, and the connection actually goes over the park and touches down at that one point on the hill. It's not actually causing us to lose any square footage on the park. I think it's hard to see that when you're looking at it just from a plan view, but it's actually 2 levels. And so we can get people onto the park, off the flyover connection into the park and vice versa without losing square footage in the actual park.
Oh, thanks, Ramona. The other thing about this slide that I'd like to note right now, we're proposing to do the flyover connection as a wooden bridge. We're doing this intentionally to sort of bring you back in history, but also we would like to build this park out of materials that existed at the time, out of as many natural materials made by nature that we possibly can. So you can see here our natural stone stair and our wooden flyover connection. But that's our intention, to make this of the time and as natural as we possibly can. So the next part of the presentation is about our plant selection and our landscape design, our material selection. And Anissa Inouye, our landscape architect, is going to lead this part of the discussion.
Thank you, Carol. And hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this evening for the third round of community meeting. Some of you or many of you might have already attended the previous meeting. So I'd like to update you on what has changed since the last time. On the slide that you're seeing now, we are indicating where the proposed plant materials are going to be. Now, these bubble images only showed representative areas and species. On the following slides, I will show you more images, so please hold on. So at the last community meeting, we received comments from some of you about the amount of trees that we are showing on the site plan. The comments were related at the time, the impression that the park was going to be very, very hot and there was not going to be enough shade. So as you saw on and during Carol's explanation of the sun study, we have learned that in the afternoon, the park is actually going to be in significant shaded area. However, we do recognize that our previous site plan did have some extra areas for additional trees. So when we are working on this plan updates, we try to balance between the amount of shade, amount of sun, and where they are located on the site plan, and also the preservation of the views to the lake that everybody is concerned about. So I'd like to explain locations, specific locations where we have added trees to the plan since the last time you saw this. First, as you enter the park from the southwest corner by the bridge house. Yes, those trees we have added since the last plan. Then across that plaza to the north, there is an island with trees. Yes, that island used to be about half open lawn space and half tree spaces. Now we've added more trees, so now we have the island filled with tree canopies. Then we also added trees along the south boardwalk that used to be completely open. Now, for us to be able to add those trees behind the boardwalk, we studied the view corridor from the entrance to the lake, and we had to eliminate the previous trees that used to be along the north edge of the river plaza, where the green colored space that you see on the slide. So that we had to open the views so that you can see the view, the open space into the park, and then out to the lake to the east. The next location we've added trees are to the exchange green on the north side. That's the large lawn space that you see by the wet prairie. Yes, those are the tree groves to the north one. That location we've added trees. Please know, as we explained at the last meeting, that the large green space that you see on this image needs to be kept open so that the Chicago Park District can host public programs such as the movies in the parks. And that's the minimally required square footage that the public programs need. So that space needs to stay open. Then the northwest corner where the mural wall ends on the north side, we have added a tree. So those are the locations, and we hope that these updates responded to your previous concerns and comments. The next slide, please. Okay, so these images show the trees that we are using for the park. All these trees are native to Illinois, and these trees support habitat for wildlife such as birds and insects. Now, these trees provide seeds, nuts, and berries for the birds to take advantage on. The combination of these trees will provide all of those resources for the wildlife to survive and thrive. The next slide, please. So this image, the next one, please. Yes, that one. Okay. So this slide shows representative species and cultivars of native forbs and grasses. There are more that we are using for the park, but these are some of the representative ones. And big thank you to the Chicago Park District. We are utilizing many of their expert suggestions and experiences about what is appropriate and what can successfully thrive in this park environment. All of these plants that you're seeing on the screen, and as I said more, those are native to Illinois. And you will see these plants largely at the wet prairie, on the woodland on the north, and along the mural wall on the west. We rely heavily on historical documents to know what are believed to have existed in this area, but we are not trying to create a replica of what DuSable might have seen during his time. The shoreline has changed, as we all know. The setting has changed. The river wall wasn't there before. So the intent is to bridge the past to recall DuSable's time, as Carol and Ramona mentioned earlier, and then bridge the past, the present, and hopefully the future by incorporating the materials that can showcase all of those times and the transition. Therefore, from the DuSable's time, you will see things like wild onions that the historical documents have documented and that we know that have existed in the past. The next slide, please. This slide shows the hardscape materials and selections, and the design intent remains the same. Different surfacing materials define each circulation area and a program space. And all areas are connected by accessible paths, including the boardwalk that goes around the river wall. As Carol mentioned earlier, we are trying to use natural materials wherever possible, such as wood and stone, and also materials that contribute to sustainable management of the site. For example, permeable pavers to retain water, stormwater on the site before getting discharged into the river. So those design intent sustainability are core to our design, and the intent has remained the same. Now, next, I believe Ramona will talk about cultural interpretation.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Misa. So the next couple of slides, we're just going to take you through some of the elements that have been identified for cultural interpretation. I don't think we had really defined it at this point the last time we met with the community, but thus far, this is what our team and along with the Park District have come up with regard to the cultural interpretations. It's our intent to educate, honor, and recognize and celebrate at this park. We'll educate the public on DuSable's heritage and his journey. We'll honor DuSable as the first non-native settler, and we'll recognize the Potawatomi people, Kitty Howell's role, and Harold Washington's and the park advocates. And then we'll celebrate the natural landscape and this location. You can go to the next slide. The next slide is actually an interpretation matrix that will just kind of go through and show you how we plan to do that. You'll see we plan to do these things: educate, honor, recognize, and celebrate. But we have 5 elements that will be located in the park. You can go to the next slide. They will actually show you where those elements are. We'll have, of course, the welcome sign. We have the mural wall, which will have an opportunity to celebrate DuSable and honor, and educate the public about Chicago. There's the history walk, which is indicated by 3. And though the history walk actually is broken into 3 segments that talks about DuSable's early life, his relationships and his connections, and then his legacy as you travel on this history walk. And then there's the Park Pavilion, as Carol has mentioned before. We've talked about how the intention around this pavilion is to celebrate the estate that DuSable held when he was here, and to really try to uplift the items that were listed on his deed of sale. And then lately there has been a new development. Heather may speak to this later, but the statue that is being proposed by DCASE. So we've identified a location here, on a potential location here on the site. If you go to the next slide, there's really not much more to say about the pavilion. Carol spoke to this earlier, but the intent is that, it's a place where you will pause and opportunity for you to pause and reflect. But the intent is also that there are a number of elements that were a part of DuSable's estate, a number of things that he was able to collect and use actually in his business, in his enterprise. And so what we're wanting to do here is create a structure that honors that shows that demonstrates that, so that you can look upon this and see that he owned a grist mill, he owned a bakery, he owned stables and cows and chickens and pigs and all kinds of things that would be necessary in a estate like this. So the next slide, I think I'm passing this on to Susan. She's going to talk about the entry signage, the welcome signage.
Thank you, Ramona. So continuing cultural interpretation, we've seen the slide before. We'll have a welcoming kiosk, which will give visitors some basic information about the site. It will include the thank yous, the map, the land acknowledgement, and other information about DuSable. And so that will be located as you enter the site. And you can see a little more detail here. There'll be 2 very tall plinths. And like I said, there'll be the map, which will help you to get around on the front. thank you message will be included on the back. We will have, oh, sorry. We have a likeness, which we will have of DuSable, and a brief history and some other information about the park and the overview. And as I mentioned, the land acknowledgement will also be included in these plinths as you enter. All right, in addition to those signs, we will have interpretive signs placed throughout the park to speak to the historic information, park plantings, some general facts about people and animals in daily life, and other site elements, call out those main site elements which we reviewed: the pavilion, the woodland, the mural, and the wet prairie. Additionally, as you enter at all Park District sites, we will include standard CPD signage at the main entrances, which will be at the entry here, and also at the connection to the flyover. As we've mentioned a few times, there will be a continuous path where we'll be calling out some key history notes about DuSable, his life and his relationships, which will wind from the entry and around this way as you come around to the woodlands. And there'll be plaques that are embedded into the walkway, and you'll be able to stop and read those as you go along. And again, these are the 4 focus areas: his journey, his life in this area, his relationships, and of course, his legacy. Dorian, are you available?
Yes, hello. So I'm going to be talking about the mural wall a little bit. This slide indicates the placement of the mural, and as you can see, the mural wall will have this beautiful, elegant curve that sits on the west end of the park. Its size is about 284 feet, and it is roughly 8 feet high for the majority of its length. This will be a concrete wall, and can we go to the next slide? So this slide kind of shows a breakout of what the mural wall will, the story that the mural wall will be telling. It'll be a colorful rendering using both paint and mosaic tile, and it'll visually be broken into 5 sections that are approximately 60 feet long, telling the story of DuSable's life within 5 themes. DuSable as a traveler, as an entrepreneur, a tradesman, a cultural connector, and as a family man. Each section will feature vignettes that will be making use of things such as historic maps, and it'll be celebrating not only DuSable's personal relationships, but his relationship to the community around him. Also featuring flora and fauna that was native to Chicago at the time, and using motifs and patterns and color palettes that are inspired not only by the Haitian culture, but also by the Native American culture. And with that, I will pass it on back to Heather. Oh, I'm sorry, the statue location. Okay, I thought, sorry.
Sorry.
You want me to address that one? Okay, because Ramona had just spoke about that on the larger map, but this map does indicate the zone of the placement for the sculpture, because at this stage we do not know its size or its materiality. We have just kind of outlined an area that we think the statue would best be placed, which is right in front of the pavilion. And as we get further details, we will specify the site exactly as we develop the design for the statue itself.
All right. Thank you, Dorian. Thank you, Ramona. And thank you to all of you who have stayed with us this whole time. We're getting to the end here. So my job is to tell you a little bit more about our next steps from here. So one of the things that we have to do whenever you're doing a project of this size is to continue coordination with a bunch of agencies. So we have spoken in the past about our work with the Chicago Department of Transportation. The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities has done their initial review. We'll continue to work with them as we move into permits and construction documents, as well as Related Midwest. I know we've explained in the past that they are providing funding for the park. They're currently staging on the park to build their building, then they'll pull off and build the park per the plan development documents that were negotiated by the Park District and the city and Related. And so there's a couple other agencies that we wanted to mention tonight that are kind of a significant part of our next steps. So one of those is the Department of Planning and Development at the City of Chicago, also known as DPD. This park, along with Related Midwest and a bunch of other sites in the Streeterville area, are in a plan development, PD 368, as it's known. And so as such, we have to go to the city for site plan approval and go to the Plan Commission to share at least an informational presentation about our site plan and where we are in design. And the site is also located in the Lakefront Protection Zone. So we will also submit a Lakefront Protection application with the city and go to Plan Commission to get that approved as well. We don't have a specific date. We think we'll be going into Plan Commission towards the end of the year, and we will work with the Department of Planning to help us navigate that process. Another group that you have heard about a little bit tonight is to kind of help us work through some of the cultural interpretation. So the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, known as DCASE, is helping us with funding for cultural interpretation, like the statue. And then we also, obviously, Dorian just presented a wonderful mural wall, so there'll be lots of opportunities for cultural interpretation that we will work through with the steering committee, but that will definitely be another step in our process. Third, we're also going to be working on construction documents that we hope to finish late this fall. So the architects and designers and landscape architects here are going to be busy working on those. As I think we've mentioned in the past, someone reminded me today that this park has been 37 years from the time that Harold Washington named it for DuSable. And so we got to get going and build a park. So that is what we are intending to do. We want to deliver a park to the community. And so we will be working on construction documents. As part of that process, we will also be going through permits with the city and several other agencies. For the outfall, I think we need to go to the Army Corps. So there's a bunch of different other agencies that we will be coordinating with. And so hopefully we'll be starting that towards the end of the year. And then lastly, we would just want to mention that much like this recording that you'll hear tonight, will be posted on our website. We also will provide project updates on the website. And one thing that we thought might be helpful to people is once we kind of have a final package together, that we could post the design documents and give people a 30-day comment period where they can get back to us at the Park District, give us some feedback on where we landed on the final design here. And also, obviously, we'll have those presentations before the Chicago Plan Commission, which will also offer another public comment opportunity. And so we look forward to continuing to develop this park and hope to see it through very soon. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Julia and go through our Q&A for the evening. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm taking the orders and questions and comments in the orders that they have been presented, and we have some really interesting questions and some comments and observations from our participants. So let's start with the first one. This study shows that both buildings are built, but that's not guaranteed, is it? There is a traffic study that is required before the second building will be approved. Could you address this? And I think that this comment came, Carol, when you were talking about the sun study, but
Right.
it's open to anyone to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, I can comment on that, Julia. I am going to go out on a limb here because I don't have the exact date and information on the drawing. I believe the drawing shows the current condition and isn't dependent on those towers, but I will be glad to confirm that for you.
Thank you for that, Carol. The next comment is, it's not a question, but an opinion that the canoe kayak station along the Alden slip slide, has a ton of boat traffic and would be restrictive. a follow-up question to that too. Well, will the park be open 24 hours? If not, how will it be secured to prevent thugs and homeless people from using it? I will direct this to Heather.
Okay, let me first answer the canoe question, I believe. So yeah, and I just want to be clear because I saw there were a couple comments about the canoe question. So we don't have that in the plan right now. And what I was trying to explain is partly because we had to build the seawall, you know, fairly high and strong so that we could protect the park space. So it would be something that we would have to consider in the future. So I think if we go down that road at that point, we would be having more community meetings to talk about where that location would occur on the site. So I saw some people said Ogden Slip is busy and the river's busy as well. So we'll obviously have a very rigorous debate if and when we go forward with any kind of canoe station. But right now, the park that you see on the screen and the park and information that we presented to you tonight does not include a canoe station or a kayak station. And we are just focused on getting this beautiful park built for you as soon as we can here. And then the second question, Julia, was about, would you remind me again?
Oh, yes. Will the park be open 24 hours? If not, how will it be secured to prevent thugs and homeless people from using it?
Yeah, so none of our lakefront parks have fencing all the way across them, so we would not anticipate doing that here. But we do have security, and we work very closely with our police commanders and our police districts in order to monitor the parks. So of course we can't, you know, necessarily be preventing every type of activity that might occur on the park, but we certainly would have our security. We are looking into security cameras with OEMC as well that would get this site on their radar. So we do that already along the lakefront. They have many cameras on the lakefront trail, and I would anticipate that that's what we would do here as well to handle those issues.
Thank you, Heather. This is another comment or question regarding the kayak, but I believe you addressed it, but we want to voice their comment that your speaker mentioned that additional commercial venues such as kayaking would be considered along the DuSable Park, but that they may be better positioned around the Ogden Inlet. Many of the residents are so close that we would like to discourage the Ogden Inlet location. So I think that you did address that in a few at your earlier comment. Another comment that has been uplifted is that the Lurie Gardens tries to have interesting plants to look at all year round. Is this one of the goals of the plantings in the park? Turn it over to Misu or Carol or
Hi,
any
I can
other
answer.
DPDA. Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
yes. Hi. This is Miss. I can respond to the question. Yes. Thank you for asking. Yes, that is correct. That we are one of our objectives is to have plants that can showcase the seasonal changes in spring, summer, fall, and in winter. And as we know, that some of the native plants, bulbs, and grasses can stay up, so that those could provide visual interest when everything else around it is bare and brown or died back. So yes, that is our intent. But as a small note and recap, the site is 3.4 acres, and it is a good sized site, but compared to, say, the Millennium Park, it's a more compact and intimate site. And within this site, we have to include a lot of program needs as well. So we won't have 3.4 acres in its entirety to be able to do and more plants and more seasonal changes, but we are going to do so, and with the help of the Chicago Park District powerhouse experts, in order to keep the interest through the park throughout the year for everyone.
Thank you, Misu. Thank you, Misu. We have another comment. It says informational plaques for the house and the wetlands could provide excellent learning opportunity. Another comment is that I'm glad that Carol commented that DuSable did not have a cabin, as some people are inclined to say, but an estate, correct? In fact, it was adorned with magnificent paintings and furniture. Bravo. we have a comment that says the Treaty of Greensville 1795 was with the Council of the Three Fires, not just the Potawatomi. This is the this was the land he purchased. The follow-up comment to that was the land acknowledgement must include all of the three tribes who were in Chicago in the 1700s, the Chippewa, Potawatomi, and Ottawa. We have another question which says, will there be a statue of Kitty Hawa as an equal? She was a business partner beyond an interpreter advisor. It is important that women be represented as equals. Another comment regarding, I guess, to the cultural narration is that any thought to having some audio narrative that could be accessed from phones through QR codes on some of the signage that might provide additional information than what can be placed in writing throughout the park. That, of course, could come later. Later if the thought is valuable.
Julia, can you allow Heather to respond to the previous question from Matt Udo?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, Heather?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I think people also mentioned sort of the historical interpretation, which I think will come later, on in our process as we work through cultural interpretation. It is a big important part of our next step, and we are working with DCASE on that. And of course, as a woman, I'm certainly interested in seeing women represented as well. But it is a balancing act that I think we're going to be working through with our steering committee and DCASE and others. As we obviously, Harold Washington named this park for DuSable back in 1987. And so we're trying to find that right balance. I think you saw with Dorian's mural that she's capturing a lot of his life, and including Kitty Hawa in that as well. So that's a conversation that we're going to continue to have, Matt. I think as we're getting funding for statues and for other cultural interpretation, that's going to be a process that we go through here while the design team is working on construction documents and things. That's a conversation that's continuing, and partly also why we want to provide an update to everyone on our website and give people a chance to post comments as we go forward. So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Heather. We have another question. Beside this meeting, what type of involvement are you considering for your neighbors, such as mine, Lake Point Towers?
That. We have had a steering committee member from Lake Point Towers. So this site's actually been under design. I think we had our first steering committee meeting back in 2022. So we've been at it for a while. Certainly if there are specific questions from Lake Point Towers, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to chat with you further. But this is our third community meeting on this project, and we've had a number of steering committee meetings too. So a lot of folks from the community have given us some wonderful feedback. For instance, one of our steering committee members from Lake Point Tower, we don't have it on the drawings yet because it just came up recently, but they asked about birdhouses. So, how are you potentially incorporating the fact that DuSable and the whole lakefront is along the migratory bird path, which is super important to the park district and super important to our ecology in Chicago. And so we don't have it shown on drawings yet because it just came up, but we thought that was a really interesting idea. So we've asked the design team to figure out where would be a good location to potentially put those in the future as we're working through some of those design issues. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We have another question. How did DuSable acquire this land? The tribes had not yet signed the Treaty of 1795. Does anyone from
I don't think that that question is really addressed to us, unless Dr. Reed feels like he would want to respond to that.
Okay. So I will move on. I don't know if Dr. Reed is on the call, but we definitely will make sure that he gets this question. Going to the next question, who will be consulted for the land acknowledgement and Kitty Hawa Excuse my mispronunciation. Heather?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. So we have not developed anything on the land acknowledgement yet. My understanding is from a global park district perspective, we are also looking at that question. So I believe that that there is a broader effort at the park district. With this specific project, we do also have Native representation on our steering committee. So they would certainly be one group that we would talk with. And I think as you're seeing, like we're moving into the next phase of the design of this, which is cultural interpretation. So we don't have all those answers for you just yet. But that is something that we will be working on going forward here.
Thank you, Heather. We also were provided with an online resource, which is also in the Q&A, the SPSSI online library at YLA.com. Another comment is that there were actually 12 tribes in Greenville in 1795 treaty. We have a comment that I have submitted numerous times, the facts that Chicago is Potawatomi ancestral lands. In fact, the Potawatomi sued for possession of the space that the park is situated on. And I don't want to mispronounce it. I want to say Daorin knows all this. Anyone wanting my article about the land acknowledgement can contact this person at low89@osu.edu. And it was an agreement with the former comment that yes, not all 12 were tied to Chicago, obviously. Another question is, will the park be approachable to outsiders not living in the downtown area?
Sanctuary city board would be. The only meeting would have a budget or obligation to enforce U.S. immigration laws.
I think I can take that one. So
okay, all right,
the question,
thank you,
yeah, that's okay. We had a little feedback there. So I believe the question was, will the park be approachable for people who don't live in the downtown area? Yes. So we have 2 entry points into the park. One is from the Riverwalk, and it is a little bit hard to picture because right now the way that it's situated, there isn't a great connection to DuSable Park from the Riverwalk, but that is being developed and built. So there will be a tunnel that connects from the Riverwalk under Lakeshore Drive and comes out into our park. And so we are working really closely with Related Midwest. That is something that they, as part of their development, are required to build. So they are building sort of a tunnel underneath that will allow people to come this way. So if you are on the Riverwalk as a visitor and you're coming this direction, we will also coordinate with the city on signage and how you get there. That would be one way that you access the park. A second way that you would access the park is we spent a lot of time talking about the flyover connection. So if you're just, out from another neighborhood and you're riding your bike or you're doing your 26-mile run along the Lakefront Trail and you want to stop in at DuSable Park, you will absolutely be able to. You will have a connection there that will take you down into the park and allow you full access. There's one other thing we haven't talked about yet that we are in fact working on, and that is a drop-off point under Lakeshore Drive. It would need a bunch of different approvals. We've been working with CDOT and talking with CDOT and Related Midwest and some of the other groups that we would need to get approval on. But we recognize that if you're coming with your family for a day and potentially you've got someone in your family who's got a mobility challenge, that maybe walking the full length of the Riverwalk or the Lakefront Trail is not going to work for you. There are ramps that come down into this space. And so what we're envisioning is that there would be a drop-off area at grade where you would be able to drop your party off. And then if you need to go find parking somewhere else, you can do that. But that would be another way of doing it. And also that drop-off we hope would serve any of the groups that are coming. So we love to educate our park kids about different parks and locations. And obviously we're going to have a lot of cultural and historical interpretation on the site that we'll love to have them. So, to the extent that we have our park minibuses coming or something to drop kids off during the summer, that is another way that could be handled.
Thank you so much for that, Heather. We have just another comment on the conversation of the 1785 Treaty of Greensville, and it states it was primarily dealt with taking the bottom half as what is now Ohio and the established Fort Dearborn. We have a comment saying thank you to CPD and the DPDA team for conducting this meeting. Another question, I believe, is regarding the current land management. There was a rather significant problem with the Canada thistle going to seed and contaminating the surrounding area via wind and water. If there's no groundbreaking before the thistle sets buds next season, what is your plan to ensure that we don't have the same problem next season with further contamination of the broad surroundings? I've been fighting a large infestation in adjacent parkland, and this is very unfortunate setback for combining the noxious weeds. We recognize that battling Canada thistle, sorry, I'm slurring that, is a complex issue throughout the park system, but would like to know what you expect to do going forward. Thank you. And Heather?
Okay. So yes, and I believe that this person might have reached out to the Park District directly. We did send people in to use basically weed whackers. So one thing about Canadian thistle, it is definitely not just, I think you noted in your comments, not just a DuSable Park challenge. It pops up and cracks all over sidewalks and everything else. So this is definitely something that is citywide, that is a species that is a challenge. So I think the challenging question that you're asking is one that I don't necessarily have an answer for, because right now the site is not developed. So we're showing you these beautiful images, but right now, Related Midwest is using it to stage for their construction site, and we don't have the ability to get heavy equipment in there to do what we would normally do, which is sort of mow things and take care of things. The site is essentially closed. It is not an open park right now because it's not developed. So the only thing that we can really do is periodically have our natural resources folks go in and weed whack, as best they can. And it's not something, again, that's on our regular maintenance list because of that. And people should not be on the site. Just want to emphasize that this is a closed park right now because it's not developed. And so while I recognize that it is an issue that we will have to handle, it's, hopefully once we get this beautiful park developed and designed appropriately, we will have that well in hand, because Misa's going to plant beautiful plants and native plantings that will take care of that problem once and for all.
Thank you for that, Heather. We do have a question. Did you say there would be a 30-day comment period? I know I'm a broken record, but it would be great to have some more design details about the flyover.
So I think what we were suggesting is that that we would put our final package online so that you could take a look at it. So we would update the design drawings with any changes that are made going forward. Also, I mentioned that we have to go to Plan Commission, so that's another opportunity for people to come make comments about the park. At that point, so we don't have a specific date for that, but at that point we would give sort of a 30-day comment period for people to put comments on our website and give us feedback on the design at that point. But yes, we have, so as I mentioned, we've been working on this park since 2022, and we have coordinated flyover conversations with CDOT, who are experts on bridges. We rely on them a lot in terms of these structures throughout the city. And so, that is something that we have worked through, but of course, everyone is welcome to comment on anything. So I'm happy to hear further discussion.
Thank you very much. We have another comment tying back to an early remark that the Ojibwa and Odawa have only a wishful claim to Chicago. And he encourages you to read his article or reach out to him at low.89@osu.edu. We have a comment here that he met Catherine in Peoria, not Chicago, who owned Chicago in 1780. I think that was a question that ties back to an earlier one, and I'm not sure that our historian is on the call, but we will uplift that to him for clarification. Another comment is, I thank all of you for the latest updates. I applaud the design team for listening to us. I hope that you'll continue to include the advocate groups that have been involved in for decades. I'm sorry, does someone from the team want to come on to speak?
Yes.
Oh, you are in, Dr. Reed. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't see you. Please
No,
go
no,
ahead.
I'm stuck at an automobile problem, 3 hours waiting for a tow truck. What is the
Oh.
question now? It's about someone in the 18th century, what? Laying claim to what?
Let me go back up. They were talking about the Treaty of 1785. One person said that the Treaty of Greendale primarily dealt with taking the bottom half of what is now O'Hara and established Fort Dearborn. I'm trying to scroll up to the earlier question, was how did DuSable acquire this land? The tribes did not yet sign the Treaty of 1795. I think that that's where the conversation and exchange between the participants ensued.
Yeah, so the question is, did DuSable claim ownership of the land?
Well, how did DuSable acquire this land? And the comment following the question is, the tribes had not yet signed the Treaty of 1795.
I can only surmise that his cordial relations with the Potawatomi led them to allow him to set up his trading complex before the Treaty of 1795. That's the best I can do. I haven't heard anything about this before, but we know he was established with them. And it sounds like someone is thinking of 21st century ownership. I don't think he claimed that. I think it was an informal relationship in the European sense, but with the Native Americans, more formal in that they accepted him and his activities as reasonable. We don't know of any friction with the Potawatomi and DuSable.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reed, for your comment. We have another question. Who is this member of LPT? I am a board member. I'm not sure what the acronym LPT stands for. I do apologize for my.
Yeah, it's Mr. Johnson. Why don't you send me an email at heather.gleason@chicagoparkdistrict.com. We can take that offline.
Thank you for that, Heather. We have another comment. The relationship of the city with the native population has changed a lot since the 80s when this park was designated. And I hope and expect this park to reflect those changes, including the importance of having a Native American wife and partner is a strong connection to his success in navigating the present day committee. The next comment is, thank you for the excellent design and presentation. We must remember that this park is dedicated to DuSable and his importance on the building of Chicago as an economic center and his legacy. Another follow-up is directed to Heather. Thanks, Heather. Hopefully we may have our first woman president and can move on from portraying history and my district, oh gosh, I can't pronounce this. Someone help me. Misogynistic. I was slaughtered in my head. Thank you, misogynistic light. Thank you for the opportunity to attend. We have a question about, they would love to learn more about the drop-off, so I will pause there.
Yes, we don't have an image in it right now because we are working with CDOT. So as soon as we have, images that we're able to share, hopefully we'll be able to put that in our final design package as we get further along on that. But we don't have any further detail about it tonight.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have another comment. Just please contact me directly as to whomever you are dealing, whoever you are dealing is not official. We have a comment that's following up to the conversation on the Canada thistle. Our group is open to being part of the solution if that can be of any assistance. Another comment is that we asked the planners to look at the treaties that include this land. All of the historic tribes deserves to be remembered. A comment devoted to Heather. Heather, for the records, most of our conversations with reputable sculptors, average monuments are designated after consulting with developers in the park district regulation and restrictions. We have another question here. My apologies if this question has already been addressed, if I have he has spotty reception. Are there areas within the park that have shade and allow for seating or standing away from the heat and intensity of direct sun? I think that was addressed, but since you maybe came in later to the call, I will turn it back over to Carol or to Misu to address. Or any DPDA member?
Lisa, do you want to do that one?
Yes, yes, thank you for the question. We did address the sun study and the areas of sun and areas of shade during our presentation about halfway through. One of the reasons we have added more trees, and of course, many of these are deciduous, 100% deciduous trees. So in winter, those will be more bare and open, but during the other seasons, these additional trees should be able to provide more larger canopy for increased comfort of the area. In addition to that, our sun study, which you missed unfortunately, but as Heather mentioned earlier, Park District will be able to share this presentation in a few days on the website. So please take a look when you have a chance. But our point was that the adjacent buildings from the other side, west side of the DuSable Lakeshore Drive, are going to provide shade and over the park, mostly during the afternoon hours. So if you could please take a look at that slide and the presentation when that becomes available, and if you still have questions, please send them through the Chicago Park District, and we will respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Misa. There was a correction, I guess a typo. He said, sorry, it's 1795. And goes on to say that the land was probably acquired as a mayor of Marion in the Potawatomi, and as they had no personal property rights, he was allowed to stay as a member of the Potawatomi community. Another question is, thank you so much. She realized that the team is juggling a lot here, the variables and constraints. It's not easy work. This goes back, I think, to that whole conversation about the 1795 Greensville Treaty and ownership of the land. The comment is, John Lowe and Dr. Reed, there are no documents regarding this land as being owned by DuSable. Please stick to the documents, is a comment being shared. A question to the team is, will there be a divvy station at the park?
Ooh, sorry, I need to come off mute. I can take that one really quickly. There is not a divvy station planned currently, but if you saw the beginning part of the presentation, we have two different locations for bike parking. It's something that we can certainly talk about in the future. I think first we want to get the park built and get the basics in there, and then obviously divvy is a bigger footprint that we will need to think through with CDOT. But as I mentioned before, our parks are never really done. We always are evolving them over time, so it's certainly something we could think about in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Heather. There seems to be this ongoing exchange between Mr. Lowe and Dr. Wise. So I'm going to let the two of you take that offline to get to a couple of the other questions. You all have been so patient through this, and we're so very appreciative. We have another comment here that I'm very happy to see that at last progress is being made in moving Mayor Harold Washington's dream come true. It has been over 37 years that the land was dedicated to honor DuSable by Peggy Montez. last question that is so far in the Q&A. On the proposed framework of the DuSable house in the park, where was that house located? On this park land location or where?
I can answer that one if you want me to.
Yes, please do, Ramona.
So DuSable's actual estate was not at this location. His estate is located a little further west of here, at the site that is commonly referred to as where the Apple store is where his estate was located. This site was dedicated as a piece of land that was dedicated by Harold Washington for us to use to honor DuSable as DuSable Park.
Thank you, Ramona. We have another one. Again, I think this goes back to Dr. Weiss, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Dr. Weiss. Can you be more specific about your inquiries? I'm interested to learn more. So possibly if you can share, Dr. Weiss, your information with Mr. Paul, then you can continue that conversation. Thank you. I'll give it another minute or so because it's 7:28 and we had promised that we would end our presentation at 7:30, but we do want to honor your comments and your feedback. So we'll give you another moment or so to write any other of your queries or questions or insights into the Q&A. We have a thank you coming in. And thank you for your attending the presentation and your participation and all of your insights and your comments to the DPDA team and CPD. Given that no one else is chiming
One
in.
last question.
There's
Oh,
one last
yes.
question. Yeah, I can take it too. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So there was a question in the Q&A that says, can you tell us when this will be completed? So that's actually a great question and answer to end on this evening. So as we were explaining in the beginning, or if you haven't been part of our community meetings before, the building of DuSable Park is very much tied to the development that Related Midwest is building their current tower right now. They are donating $10 million to have the park built. We have another $5 million in OSIP funding from the city of Chicago. They are using the park site right now to stage on so that they can build their tower. And when they are done, they will build the park. What our job as the park district is to turn construction drawings over to them at the appropriate time so that they can kind of get their heads around it and start thinking about how the park might be built. So that is part of the public benefits back to the public that Related Midwest and the city negotiated as part of the plan development. But we were able to have a Related Midwest representative at our last meeting in May. And the rough time frame, and it is a little bit rough, obviously construction, kind of ebbs and flows and has some issues along the way. So it could change over time, but the timing that they presented was that they started their caissons in the first quarter of 2024. They were planning on having their superstructure constructed in the fourth quarter of 2024. And then the park and Riverwalk construction, because they're building that tower along the way, they would anticipate starting in the third quarter of 2026, with the park open in the third quarter of 2027 is sort of how Related laid that out. And again, there will be more updates along the way. We promise we're not going to be gone for 4 years. You're never going to hear anything. But because of the way this is structured and Related is very, very much involved, they are using our site right now to build their tower before we can get the park built. So I will just say thank you so much for joining us this evening. I feel like we always have a rigorous discussion whenever we talk about this park. So thank you for your thoughtful questions and comments. And we really appreciate all of you joining this evening. So thank you so much and have a good evening.